The idea for this panel actually came to be a couple of years ago when Calliope Ryder asked me to moderate a panel about non-violent games. And at that time I was like, who me? I don't know anything about this. But it went down really well. That was at like an Auckland Game Dev meetup, and I thought, oh, this would be a great idea for an NZGDC panel. So we actually kind of had the idea for this last year, but of course that didn't happen. So I'm really pleased that we got to do it this year, because I think it's super important, and it's awesome to see such a big turnout. Who am I? I'm Lisa. I work at Runaway Play as a narrative designer, and I'm also community director. We make mobile games inspired by nature, inherently very peaceful, calming games. And I also recently started a company with my friends to make a code-funded game about a toro or an albatross, which will also be non-violent. I'm just going to take a sip real quick. So that's a bit about me and what the panel is going to be about. Now I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists, which is great because it's also majority Dunedin people, which is pretty cool. So Sam Barham is creative director at Balancing Monkey Games, creators of a non-violent city building game Before We Leave. Sam is one of New Zealand's latest indie success stories, with a journey that started in 2018 where he developed the prototype from Otipoti and became a finalist in Kiwi Game Starter. He continued to work on the project and resubmitted Before We Leave the following year, taking out the first prize. And in 2020, Before We Leave had a successful exclusive launch on Epic Games Store, and they have now partnered with Team 17, a little company, to bring the game to Steam, which just recently released. He's also a local legend in Dunedin. He loves being called that, so you should call him that. And then we have Steph in the middle. Steph is creative director of Spooky Soft Games in Otipoti, and she released The Spooky House in 2019 and is currently working on a mobile penguin game for children. I'm not sure if you have like your iPad with you to show people, but...
It's hiding over there.
Yeah, I was just like, if people approach you and want to ask about it, I don't want to throw you off. But it's really cool, so you should ask her about it. And then finally, we have Robert Curry on the end here, who is the senior designer at Dino Polo Club, which he co-founded with his brother Peter in 2013. And he works as a senior designer, and his work can be seen in the hit award-winning titles, Mini Metro and Mini Motorways. And Robert has previously worked at Sheet Interactive and also co-founded the New Zealand Game Festival, where he served as director from 2015 and 2019. So that's kind of a bit about who these people are. I'm going to start asking them questions that I've already kind of put together myself, but we do want to have time for questions, so please put them through the app as soon as you can so that we can read them and share them. So I thought it would be good for us to kind of start and define, first of all, what non-violent games are in the context that we're speaking about them. So the way that I kind of look at it is that it's gameplay focused. So games that don't really involve either combat or violence as a core mechanic. But I wanted to hear from the panelists what they thought as well. So maybe let's start with Sam, since you're closest to me.
It's an interesting one, and I'll talk about why later. But to me, non-violence, it's all about the player actions. What is the player doing? Are they using weapons? Are they hurting others? Short version.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's just about the verbs that we give to overcome obstacles. If those verbs are to build or organise or optimise or talk, then the odds are the game isn't violent. But if those verbs are to shoot and punch and hurt, then odds are it is a violent game. It isn't just an easy thing that you can just say it's either one or the other. because obviously I think there are games that could be more organisational that would have violent outcomes, but so then you're getting into like if the person playing the game isn't directly sort of inflicting harm, is that a non-violent game? I think it depends on. Oh, excuse me. Depends on the sort of what the immediate effect of the player's agency is. Yeah. So those are sort of some rough guidelines that I think can help, but I don't think ultimately there's kind of one rule that just says what is violent and what is non-violent.
I think, there's lots of different kinds of violence. Hey, there's like colonial violence, gender violence. But I guess for the purposes of the conversation, it makes more sense, that violence is the core mechanic of a game where you're trying to sort of eliminate living things in order to sort of progress through a game. And I think for a game to be non-violent, it doesn't necessarily have to be not about destruction or destroying things. It doesn't have to be building or growing or caring. I think, it can be a lot of things. So Jenga, for example, maybe it's like a non-violent game, but the whole point is that the thing's going to fall over, and if it never fell over, it would be unsatisfying and weird.
That's great.
Or other games like, say, Shipbreaker, right, which is about destruction, but it's not. I don't think you could really call that a violent game.
Yeah, and I think the reason I start with that is because, like you say, there are a lot of ways that you can interpret it, but because video games have sort of categorically been placed into the sort of mainstream psyche as being, things that high schoolers play and shoot people, but that's not, as we all know, true. So with that in mind, how do you approach your design pillars for these kinds of games? Do you start with like an intended audience or a feeling that you want to invoke, or maybe adhering to a certain genre? Start with you, Rob.
Cool. Yeah, I was actually thinking of this just this morning, and I realised I've never professionally designed a violent game. I've actually only released, I think, 5 games, 3 sports games and 2 urban planning games. So I suppose sports is a form of...
It was rugby as well, right?
Yeah. Rugby league and horse racing, I guess this question is more like, how do I approach design pillars for all the games I've designed? So I think starting with the feeling is always how I want to attack it. It's just sort of what I want the player to feel while they're playing the game. So for the mini games, that's kind of always this kind of zen, calm, peaceful construction phase, which then sort of slowly segues into this manic panic at the end of the game, but you don't really realise it's kind of hit you until it's all over. I should say that was a kind of an accident on the first game, but it was intentional in the follow-up. And with the audience, we don't tend to think about it in terms of demographics. It's more just what kind of an experience people are after. I think that's a much healthier way to approach, or at least the kind of games that we make anyway. So it's more just sort of people who want to build a thing in a calm way, or people who just want to have a nice sort of calm but kind of fast contained experience, that kind of thing. Genres, we try, I mean, it's hard not to pull from genres. I think I'm going to discuss that a lot about genres in this talk. I think genres are very handy. They're a nice collection of mechanics that work very well together that we know will have the intended outcome. But I think once you start to draw from a genre, it can be very easy to just fall into it completely without really realising it. So we're very careful whenever we skirt around genres or try and use them as design shorthands, because they can take over the game. So, that's my approach. Well, I say our approach.
Yeah. And what about you, Steph? Since you have kind of worked on 2 quite different games, I would say, both non-violent, but very different in terms of genre.
I think probably similarly, I start with the vibe that I want, and I extrapolate from there, and everything else follows on from that. Yeah, and I suppose with the audience thing, I really make games that I would want to play, and then I hope that there's other people who might want to play the same games that I want to play. Yeah, which maybe is a little narcissistic, but I think it's my only way forward. I can't guess what other people would want, I think. And probably characters, and the second thing I'm interested in, probably characters and vibes. Yeah.
And Sam?
I didn't have any design pillars because I was just making it up as I went along.
Yeah.
That's a pillar.
True. So I think for me, I was building this game. I knew I wanted to be a city builder because that's a game type I like. And I particularly like the sort of the anno and settlers and stuff. And as I was going, I just realised that the direction I was taking it in was to remove the violence. So that's, I just fell into it. And it's like, okay, I'll do that. So yeah.
And I've always found in those games, the NO and settler games, the violence is always meant as the apex thing that you're trying to build towards, and it's also the least fun aspect of any of them, and it's quite tedious. So I think you made a really good decision there to just take it out completely.
I do have to admit, I feel like a little bit of an imposter being here, because we've actually just removed the word non-violent from our Steam page.
We should have a little confessional.
So the reason, I'll talk about the reason. So, I made this game, and it was going to be kind of like Anno, kind of like Settlers, and they, as you say, the apex of those games is having weapons and armies and taking over other people's territories. So my game doesn't have that, and so I called it non-violent because I wanted to communicate to people that's what it is. But it's a city builder, and most people, when they hit city builder, think SimCity. So they came to my game thinking it was going to be this extremely non-violent thing because I was like taking SimCity and then making that even less violent. But my game has giant lasers that will destroy your buildings and massive space whales that eat pieces of your planet and the people on them, and giant robots that come along and scare your peeps so they run away and hide in their houses. Because I was trying to communicate a particular thing, but other people were taking it the wrong way, and so we've actually had people push back and go, this game is not non-violent. So we're trying to come up with a better word to describe it, like maybe non-combat or something, although it feels really clunky. But for the moment, we've gone, okay, fine, we'll pander to the vocal minority and just take the word out. So we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
He's kind of building on that as well. Since a lot of games are designed with the kind of like rush adrenaline that you get and the immediate kind of like dopamine feedback from feeling powerful, how do you get around that and kind of design to find the fun in a combat and non-violent way?
I think for me, it's because I love the sort of the ant farm feel of games in this general area. So you've got this little thing, and there's all the people running around doing their jobs, and you can just kind of sit there and watch it. And it's not the same dopamine hit, immediate adrenaline thing, but it's very satisfying. And the satisfaction you get from seeing an issue with your chains of resource production and blah, 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 and figuring out how to solve it. I guess it's building in the idea almost of like puzzle mechanics rather than adrenaline mechanics.
Yeah, our games are pretty much have the same kind of a pull, is that kind of ant farminess. It's just fun to watch the thing that you've built and all the little things kind of bumbling around in it. And I mean, we still do kind of follow the same kind of sawtooth tension mechanic of having an increasing challenge and then an increasing tool set to meet that. So that kind of still provides some kind of empowerment, I think. It's just not that kind of fast-paced adrenaline that I think most violent games you kind of expect from them.
There's nothing that really compares to shooting someone in the head. Like I don't know how.
Yeah, I mean, not.
And should there be?
Yeah.
No, it's its own thing.
Yeah. So we definitely don't aim to have that kind of a sense of thrill, but there are plenty of games out there for people that want that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Isn't there one? It's called something like that, and it's like a base jumping. You're leaping off buildings or something. I mean, that would be pretty adrenaline. I haven't played
take
it,
that.
but
Yeah.
I can imagine that would be a decent adrenaline hit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Cool. And for, I guess, in terms of like team structure, since, you know, I was going to say we don't build games alone, but Sam, you and Steph. But I guess creating these sorts of games, it's pretty important to have people who play these games on the teams. How do you kind of approach team structure when designing these games, and do you think that having a hugely kind of like diverse skill set is super important to that?
I think that making any game, if you don't have parts of your audience, or sorry, if you don't have a type of person reflected in your development team, you are less likely to sell to that person. And I think that goes for all games. I don't think that's just a strictly non-violent thing. But as I said, I haven't actually worked on a team that has done a non-violent game before, so perhaps that's fine for a violent game. Yeah, I think we do seek to have as many different voices in the room, so we can. It's just the same kind of thing about picking up on things that you wouldn't even think about within your kind of worldview and experience. And I think that I was kind of thinking about this a bit more this morning, and I think that perhaps one of the reasons why most kind of core games are these kind of violent experiences is just because the games industry being until I suppose it maybe 10 years ago was mostly a hobbyist industry, and the people that played games fed into the industry, and then also media outlets, and then it just became a self-perpetuating thing. So that everyone that liked the dominant form of games entered the industry, and then it just repeated. So that's why I think even though there are many different types of games out there, they have become the sort of default, the core, and that perhaps just perpetuates into a less diverse developer pool. Yeah.
I think we're lucky right now because the way games are made sort of returned to how they were made in the 80s, where you can make a game in your bedroom on your own if you want to. And I think as a result, and there are distribution platforms that there didn't used to be, there's the internet, so I think games have got weird again in a way that they were before sort of the commercial tightening. And I think the audiences are also ready for games to get weird and be sort of less genreified. Yeah,
I think more people are just discovering that they do like games. They just didn't know that there were games out there that actually appealed to them. Yeah, so I think ultimately, there's a democratization and distribution thing which has helped the last maybe 5 or 10 years for sure. Things like itch and I suppose the iPhone and the App Store has been a huge agent of proliferation of non-violent video games.
My mum's talking about playing a video game for the first time in her life.
Wow.
She sees these little ads for these mobile games. Really, I want to play that.
Yeah.
But I suppose it costs money. I think there's something about that moment.
The first video game I introduced my mum to was Wolfenstein 3D.
Wow.
And then Pac-Man. So that was a big jump back. But I think now she has an Xbox account, and now she just plays Solitaire. She's a much more hardcore gamer than I am these days.
Yeah, I think it's going back to sort of the studio. I mean, you are like it's one of those truths that you're in like general software. Your software will reflect your team structure. If you have a 2-layer team structure, you're going to have a 2-layer software structure. And it's the same with any kind of game. If you have violent people, they may be nice people, but if you have violent people on your team, you're going to make a violent game. If you have non-violent people on your team, you're going to make a non-violent game. So that's a very sort of broad hand-wavy thing, but if we're hiring someone and we got the sense that they're going to be an antagonistic kind of person, they'd be like, no, that's not the kind of team we want because it's not the kind of game we want to make, and vice versa.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is a good kind of segue because My mum has been obsessed with Runaways game Splash since I started there, which is like a fish or ocean sanctuary game where you raise and collect fish species. But the way that she plays it is like super like min-maxy, and she would do things, like I would see her playing and do things that I would never really think about, and she's very much like, no, I'm not a gamer, but like she said, she plays more games than me now. But do you kind of see that in your players as well, and how they sort of, the way that they play the games, they come up with like unexpected ways of doing things that you would never think would ever happen, particularly these kinds of non-traditional gamers, I suppose. Start with Sam, since you were nodding your head.
I'm just thinking of one of our Discord members. We had some like player challenges that we put out there, try and complete the game in as few actions as you can or something. And oh my gosh, the effort that this one guy put into it was nuts. Spending 24 hours hoping for the random generator to throw up just the right result so that he'd get one less action in launching a spaceship or something. But yeah, there is just so many different kinds of people, and they play it so differently, and you've got people that come in expecting it to be a violent game, even though that's explicitly what we tell you it isn't, or people who come in expecting it to be super chill and the least bit of challenge, they're like, nah. But there's just this huge range of people, and it's awesome to see all the different kinds of people experiencing your game and taking completely different things away from it.
In a most recent game, you can build roads, and you can. Turns out you can build roads in any shape you want, and so you can use those to spell words. So that's been a thing we've. I think we predicted that was going to happen, but it's been interesting to see. I guess if you give people the tools, they'll always write things. I think we have the same thing that Sam's had, where I think probably almost everybody just has a nice kind of like Zen experience, but there's a very small hardcore which will just push and push and push the game to its very extremes and get scores that we struggle to get. That's probably so I think we have got a wide range there for sure.
I don't have any players.
I was going to say, since you're designing a game for children, like...
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
They're going to be good at breaking it and pushing it.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Cool. This is kind of similar, but how do you sort of find the conflict and challenges within the game's design to keep people playing? I guess for Steph, for Spooky House, it's kind of this linear experience, but do you think there will be kind of that element of replayability for the Penguin game?
Yes, it's the selling point of it is that it has great replayability.
Yeah.
The game unfolds and it's a whole sort of game world, even though it's based on mini games. The games reference each other. Yeah, it's mostly what I'm working on, perfecting. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, kids are weird. Some kids can play the same simple game for like a year and be really happy. I remember watching the same video on a loop when I was a kid for years on end. But other kids, I think, get tired very quickly of things that they already know or are not interested in them. But I'm going to do my best. One of my things, I guess, is characterization and keeping characterization interesting throughout the game. And I guess maybe I've only played the recent one, but Animal Crossing would be a good example of that for me. I got it just before lockdown, and it really surprises me how much dialogue there is, and I guess it keeps updating, but there's so many characters and so much dialogue that's pitch perfect with your character. And sometimes you see two characters having a little fight, and they're just in character the whole time, and it sort of just makes visiting your island every day worthwhile.
Yeah. I find that too, like just the little kind of surprises are what keeps me going back. But I guess for something like either Mini Motorways or Before We Leave, it's more sort of design focused in the gameplay of how you keep people coming back.
Yeah, just the giving people challenges, giving people puzzles to solve. Infrastructural in my case, how do you get the resources or make the resources or keep your people happy or whatever. And I'm aware we may not have done the best job of that, but people keep coming back to it anyway. So, yeah, it's just about sort of finding different situations, allowing people to find their own situations, create their own gameplay effectively. People will come up with challenges for themselves. I'm going to play the game again, and I'm going to do it a different way, and giving them the toolbox. That's kind of what I focused in the set of buildings and things. It wasn't like, here's all these buildings that do these specific things. Here's a toolbox, and you can just kind of use these tools however you like to build your little civilization in whatever way you choose.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of types of conflict that doesn't involve violence that we can draw from. I think having a look at, say, board games, there is a large body of work there that is about very dull, dry things like selling vegetables or whatever, and it still provides interesting conflict there, and it's so I think those and they can become incredibly like cutthroat and quite tense games, but they're ultimately about very just like kind of ordinary humdrum things. So I think there are a lot of different types of conflict that you can pull from that aren't just that are adversarial or against the system, but are just completely non-violent. Yeah. Though as you raised earlier, board games do have a reckoning with sort of colonial violence.
Sometimes,
which can, because I think that's a very easy theme to fall into, which kind of has the engine building and territory control type of things without really thinking about what they're saying at a deeper level. So you're not directly you don't think you're directly inflicting violence, but you are ultimately.
Cool. This question's kind of actually inspired by lockdown. You mentioned playing Animal Crossing, which I also played a lot of. But what I found interesting was when I played New Leaf, which was the one beforehand, I would play it very slowly, but it would be every day when I was at university. In between my lectures, I would just play a tiny bit each time. But over lockdown, it was like all the time. But it quickly just kind of became not as fun for me. And it really kind of like upset me in a way that I didn't think was possible, because of the way that I had played it previously. It was like I was really slowly building towards these things, but because I had all this time, it was like, this is all I'm going to do now, and it just had no satisfaction. And so I ended up playing stuff like The Witcher, and kind of watching stuff that I wouldn't expect to, because I was like, well, everyone's having a really bad time, and so I want to watch people who are having a worse time than me to make myself feel better. So what do you think people's kind of motivations are to sort of pick up a non-violent experience versus a violent one in games?
I was trying to think about this personally, and I don't think I explicitly think in my head, right, I want to play a non-violent game or a violent game. It's typically I'm just trying to think what kind of thing I'm in the mood for. Yeah. And so if that involves just instant dopamine rush, short period of time, that odds are that may be just a Doom or a Dead Cells or whatever. But if it's more of I've got like a couple of hours or in the afternoon and I'm just wanting to sort of build a thing up, or I think often I just want to get that sort of that sort of sense of easy expansion or like perfection of the system, then odds are that's going to be a non-violent experience, because you typically don't get those in violent games. That's I guess just for me personally.
It's all about the mood, the vibes.
Yeah, I mean that's it. You know, if I'm like, I just want to blow some aliens up, then I'll go and do that. But if I want to do, I'm wanting to chill out, then blowing aliens up is not going to chill me out. So.
I think it's a tricky one. It comes down to appeal, right? Especially if it's a game you have not played before. There has to be some kind of pull, whether it's sort of aesthetic graphically or there's some tease of a story they're trying to tell. And I think, similar to reading books or watching TV shows, you're ending up in a relationship with the people who developed the thing. And if you don't have anything in common with those people, then it's not going to work. But if I think you immediately know whether the things they're trying to do appeal to you or whatever. Yeah, so it's a funny two-way street. I guess if you have vibe, like you said.
Yeah. Do you think, why is it that you think then that there are, like, sort of the image of video games is still rooted in this sort of like violent thing that kids do? Is it just society and media, or?
Yeah, I think so. It was the thing you mentioned earlier, how your mum doesn't think of herself as a gamer, even though she plays games a lot. I think when people think of the term gamer, they think Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, that kind of thing. And if you don't like those kinds of things, then you're not into games, even though you play games all the time. And I think it comes back to the thing I mentioned earlier, just the sort of gaming was sort of defined in, I guess, about the 80s, when that was kind of when that kind of self-perpetuating gamer bro kind of thing was began, and I think it's easy to see that in Gamergate, how that tribalism really came to the fore as people. It wasn't just a thing that you did, it was like a defining attribute of who you were. And then there's just been this intense pushback at any attempt to redefine games as anything other than involving guns and explosions and aliens and stuff.
Yeah, and that's it. There are a lot of people who, as you say, they define themselves as gamers. They define themselves by what they consume. So I imagine if you tried to put spy, thriller, action into Shortland Street, you'd get a massive pushback, because there'll be people who define themselves
I would love that.
partly by what they watch.
Chris
I'm
Warner
just
is a
making up an
spy.
example. I don't watch Shortland Street. I've got no clue.
Maybe you would.
But there are, whatever it is, people define themselves by things, and if you try to change that thing, you're going to get people pushing back. And games is exactly the same. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who define themselves as gamers have seen themselves as under attack for a long time, because they kind of have been. But also, they tend to already be slightly toxic young males who are not the nicest people to begin with. I have 2 of them as children, so I know. And I love them dearly. But so, we've kind of got that self-perpetuating thing, as you were saying, that you've got the media sees us as violent gamer bros, and so violent gamer bros come in, and so violent gamer bros defend themselves and want the games they want, and so that's what the media sees, and around we go. But it is changing. There are a lot of other people, and I think there's a lot of people are becoming aware that they are gamers because they play games, even if they're not shooting people. So I think that stereotype is changing.
Janet Frame, towards the end of her life, loved playing flight simulators.
Cool.
So I think, I don't really know who Janet Frame is, but she's a cherished writer. And it blows my mind that, I think of her as being from the past. And no, she was living in Opoho in her house playing the latest flight simulator every time it came out. And, she's a gamer.
Yeah,
And
Janet Frame's a gamer.
There's so many facts like that fly in the face of the stories that get retold.
Yeah, I think it's interesting if you compare, say, the games industry to the film industry, and it's not like anyone that loves the Marvel films is angry that there are like rom-coms. And I think that really shows how the gaming industry and society has to kind of, we do have a long way to sort of evolve for like everybody to accept that just because there are other films out there, that doesn't mean that you're less for liking other films.
Yeah, sometimes you're just not the target audience, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Doesn't mean that thing's bad.
Yeah. I just have one more question before we move on to Q&A, because there's quite a couple of questions that have come through, which is, what is your hope for the future of non-violent games and the currently underserved audiences who play them?
that they won't be underserved anymore.
Yeah.
That we develop more of a language of non-violent games, so that it's easier to talk about them, easier to reason about them, easier to design them because you have the language to describe them, both in terms of our designing them and in terms of our marketing of them and players' understanding of them.
Yeah, I did think it interesting that you can get things like a combat designer as a role, and that just blows my mind that the language of how to describe games in that way is so advanced that it can be someone's full-time job to just plan out how the violence is executed, that kind of thing. I do think that non-violent, probably most games are non-violent. If you have a look at the less visible markets, say, the App Store, pretty much most NZ-made games are non-violent.
Yeah.
Like, there's a handful that are, but almost all of them aren't. So I think it's not that they're not here and well, that we don't know how to make them well, and that they don't sell well. They do. It's more just that they're not visible, I think, to the non-gaming audience. So. I think it'll just take time, and say things like Umurangi Generation winning the IGF. That's a huge publicity thing for the New Zealand public to understand that these games are around and highly successful. Yeah.
I reckon I would wish that the phrase non-violent games would sort of evolve itself into obsolescence, I guess.
I
so
agree.
that games would inherently be a large bunch of things, and violent games would be, a part of that.
Yeah.
And there'd be sort of less of an opposition or a binary between these two things, because they all exist in this world of possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, because it has just become a default almost.
Yeah.
It's like how you have action films and you don't have like non-action films. Many other things.
Yeah.
Many others.
We really, or me, I agonised over the title of this panel because I was like, I don't want to call it this, but it's kind of the most straightforward way of understanding what we're going to talk about. But maybe in 5 years it'll be made up for it or something, I don't know. We've got some time for questions, so thank you for submitting them. I'm just going to start from the top, so I'm sorry if I don't get time. In your opinion, what are the best designed non-violent games not made by you, and why? Mine is Many Motorways, Before We Leave, and Spooky House.
Design non-violent game. I'm really liking Shipbreakers at the moment. Thanks for bringing that up. I never thought of it.
I got you back. Papers, Please, I really love, and that's like, that's one of my top games anyway, across. But that definitely has violent implications of your actions. But I find that makes it really powerful, and you're not the one actually inflicting any physical violence upon people, and it doesn't judge you for whatever you do at all. It's all up to you to decide how good or bad you were. But I feel I just love that game, and I think it's a really good example of just looking at a thing that is so not fun and kind of working it out into a very engaging experience.
I think when I was a kid, probably Sim City, which I love, which is sort of relates very much to the games you make. More recently, maybe the Untitled Goose game.
Yes.
Which
Played that.
it's just a romp.
It really is.
And it was, I think there are lots of things in it that that's kind of what we're talking about, that people want when they play violent games, sort of conflict and kind of winning and sneaking around. But you're a goose, you're not killing anyone. It's kind of bits where you're bullying a small boy. But that's a worthwhile thing to explore. What does that feel like? You get to be cheeky, you get to steal things. And I don't know.
It just reduces the stakes. So instead of being a homicidal maniac, you're just an asshole.
Yeah.
But it's the same. Yeah, it's the same
And that's
kind of
a worthwhile
experience,
kind of play experience, an emotional
Yeah.
thing to explore.
Yeah, that's great. When looking at the non-violent game market, what trends or player demands do you see increasing over the coming years?
I think what definitely we've found is people like to build things without us forcing a game on them, and being able to just take their time with things and take photos of their things that they've built. That's a huge thing. And I mean, as Sam said earlier, that kind of ant farminess thing, that's like always been around since like Settlers, and that's a thing that we like heavily lean into, and that doesn't seem to have hurt us. So that's a thing we'll definitely be paying more attention to. Yeah.
One thing I like that Tim Ponting's talked about before is the idea of social multiplayer games. So just a space to hang out in with your friends. And there's a game going on, but the point is you're hanging out with your friends. That's what for a lot of people, that's what board games are. It's not about the game, it's about I'm hanging out with my friends. You just need an excuse to do that.
That's still so new to me, that thing. So exciting.
Nice. So yeah, that's one thing that I think is I hope going to increase a lot.
I was watching a game YouTube, and they were talking about an very old computer game of hide and seek. And it's a two-player game back in the day, and each person had to look away from the screen when the other person was hiding their character or whatever. And the other person on the stream was saying, "What's the point? Why don't you just play hide and seek in real life? There's two of you." But the remote playing with your friends is great. Maybe you're not in a house where you can run around and play hide and seek. Maybe there's small children or adults working, and I don't know. Yeah, that game space is a pretty good one.
Yeah, I guess one that's kind of blown up in the past couple of years, thanks to like Wholesome Direct, which has like got its own kind of ecosystem and community of people, but specifically looking for games that are just a good time. So like not even like themes of anything really upsetting, but they're like video presentations where they showcase the games has like over hundreds of thousands of views, and developers have shared screenshots of kind of wish lists spiking when those happen. So I don't think it's like actually a new thing, but it's becoming more visible because of the internet and the communities coming around that as well. And things like mobile games have made it a lot more accessible for these sorts of games to come into the mainstream as well. So I think the accessibility and the visibility of them just kind of boosts it. I'm not sure if it's like a trend per se. I think it's going to be consistent, or I hope it's going to be consistent for the future of game history as well. I have not played Subnautica, but I'm going to ask this question. But how do you feel about games like Subnautica, which revolve around threats but find non-violent means to navigate without damaging ecology, etc.?
Yeah, I think that harkens back to what we were talking about right at the start about when we define what a violent game or a non-violent game is. There's always going to be areas which, it's a bit harder to kind of say one or the other. I do think, I mean, for me it comes down to the verbs that you have to use and how you solve, like how you push past challenges. So if you're not actually, so even though you might be in danger, I would hesitate to call it a completely violent game if you're not solving the challenges through violence yourself. Yeah, so that's.
Having said that, I did stasis lock and Leviathan and laboriously stab it to death because it was annoying. Every time I went through that piece of the underground, I was like, I have to dodge this damn thing. So
I'm never going to annoy you.
Never going to annoy me again.
But there's, like you were saying about your game before, where people are expecting, because it says non-violent, that there's not going to be sort of any threats or destruction or death or war or things. And I guess you can avoid those topics if you want to, and that's a sort of a genre of games, but those are also worthwhile things to explore for everyone, for children, for players, potentially, without acting violence yourself being part of the gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, my immediate reaction when you brought up Subnautica was, can you really describe that as non-violent? I mean, I'm, apart from stabbing the Leviathan to death, which is difficult and not encouraged, I'm getting eaten by freaking giant monsters, like me personally getting eaten on. So, you know, it's exactly like my game. You can justify it as non-violent because you're not taking violent actions. But there are very immediate violent actions being taken on me. So, yeah, I can see it being argued either way.
Yeah, totally. This is a great question. Do you recommend starting from an activity and making it a mechanic, or do you start with a mechanic and make it into an activity?
I think if you can start with a toy first, that's a very, well, yeah, I find that a very safe way to develop a game, because if the core interaction is just fun without anything else on top of it, any kind of metagame or anything like that, then that's a really good way to start, because it means that then you've got a very, very solid foundation to build from. But having said that, you can't design every game that way. It's hard to do a strategy game with a toy because there's not really a toy there to engage with all the time. So yeah, I think different methods of finding the fun do lend themselves to different types of games.
Yeah, it does. It just depends on what are you trying to make. Is it, like I've heard people talk about software toys as a sort of making a distinction of two different kinds of game. You've got a game and a toy. So maybe, you know, think about which one are you wanting to end up with, and that, you know, that will give you a different starting point.
Yeah, I think that's great as well. I think for like Runaway, we've kind of done it in various different ways. Like for our newest game, Old Friend's Dog game, we wanted it to just be about relationships from the beginning. We weren't really thinking about how the game would actually play, which I think is why it took a long time to develop. But because we had the kind of pillars of the tone and the feel and the people that we were making it for, that was always really easy to lean back on when we were designing the mechanics. So like an example was like in the game you can have like a live stream with the dogs because they do that at the real life sanctuary. But then early on there was like this tonal whiplash because one of the dogs that you had just adopted was like really scared and like wasn't comfortable in this home, and then you would get into the game and you would play like a live stream and the dog would be like, yeah, I'm on a live stream, and you'd be like, wait a minute, I thought you were traumatized, like what's going on? So yeah, either way, it's like you said, it's contextual, it depends on the game that you're designing for. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But thank you all so much for coming and for your questions as well. There's heaps more, but yeah, if our panellists have time to maybe stick around to answer some stuff, probably do it outside just so that we can swap the rooms and stuff because we're on a tight schedule. But ngā mihi kia te koutou, and thank you to the panellists and all of you for coming.